Welcome to Economy Made Simple. I am Shamubeel Eaqub, the Chief Economist at Simplicity. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and I'm here to make sense of it. Brought to you by Simplicity, New Zealand's non-profit KiwiSaver and fund manager, who are on a mission to make Kiwis richer and smarter with money. Welcome back to Economy Made Simple. I'm Shamubeel Eaqub, and today I'm going to speak about housing in New Zealand. What's been going on with our history, our demand, our supply, and what we can do to fix it. So housing in New Zealand, we love it. We love to buy it, we like to talk about it, and it's the topic of barbecue conversations everywhere. Whether we have it, or we want to have it, or that we can't have it. The reason why this has happened is because housing has been an extraordinary investment and also a ladder that has been increasingly pulled up. It's a long-standing issue. When it comes to house prices relative to incomes, they really started to increase from the early 2000s. Before that, the average house used to be 3 to 4 times a household's annual income, which was enough that you could save the deposit and pay off the mortgage in relatively good time in your working life. But now it's at about 8 times the typical household's income. And that means it's almost impossible for the average family to be able to save the deposit and to service that mortgage. So it's not surprising that what we have in New Zealand today is a housing crisis that's affecting more and more people. When things become expensive, fewer people can afford it. It's not surprising. What we have seen as a result of rising incomes from the early 2000s is that we've seen the rise of generation rent. More and more New Zealanders are renting. The peak of home ownership in New Zealand was 1991. It had been increasing since the Second World War because successive governments had put in place good policies to build more houses, help more people into homes, and it worked. We did the reforms of the 1980s, many of which were necessary, but we also threw out a lot of good stuff. And home ownership rates started to fall, and they're now at the lowest level since the 1950s. This rise of generation rent is probably going to hang around for a while, unless we take strong actions now. Those who manage to buy homes today are slaves to their mortgages. In the 80s and 90s, you could maybe spend 6 to 10 years to be able to save your deposit and a similar amount of time to be able to pay it off, if you're that kind of median New Zealander. But if you fast forward to today, it's probably going to take you 25 years to be able to save the deposit, and it'll probably take you more than 60 years to be able to pay it off. It is an insurmountable hurdle for most New Zealanders. Mortgages are expensive and they're unavailable for most people. They're increasingly only available for people who have very good incomes or who have parents who are able to help them. The bank of mum and dad. When I started working as an economist in the early 2000s, the housing crisis was very concentrated in a few places, in places like Auckland and some of those retirement places like Aotearoa. Fast forward to today, that infection has spread to most parts of New Zealand. In almost every part of New Zealand, house prices are really high relative to incomes, and this is an issue that affects all New Zealand rather than just some parts of New Zealand. It's not just buying houses. Even renting houses has become very expensive. Across almost every district in New Zealand, with the exception of the west coast of the South Island, renting is really, really expensive. And that's because we've run out of homes both to buy and to rent relative to the number of people we have in New Zealand. Housing is a fundamental right. We need shelter. It's one of those basic things that you see in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And yet we know that the type of home you have really matters, whether or not it is secure, whether it's comfortable, whether it's affordable, whether it's warm. We know that for most homeowners, housing is actually pretty good, but for most renters, they're quite unsatisfied because it's expensive, it's insecure, and quite often it's low quality. When we talk about housing, we can't talk about it as if it's all the same. There are many different people experiencing different types of housing conditions in New Zealand. About 2/3 of New Zealanders own their own home. That's 2/3 of families in New Zealand. Of that, you've got a big chunk who own it without a mortgage. They're pretty comfortable. They've worked hard, they've paid off their mortgages, they've got the comfort of a secure home, and that's also an asset. What we've also got is this big chunk of New Zealanders who've got big mortgages that are putting them in incredible amounts of financial stress to be able to do so. And you can see why people do it, because if you don't own your own home, it's very hard to find security because renting in New Zealand is very short term, it's volatile, rents can go up quickly, you might be kicked out of your rental really quickly. That makes it really hard for people to find security, and so people would rather pay really high prices to own a home rather than to stay renting, even if it creates all those pressures. About a third of New Zealanders rent in New Zealand. Of those renters, about 80% receive some form of housing subsidy. In New Zealand last year, we spent over $4 billion in subsidizing housing, whether it's for social housing or it's for people who are living in their rental properties, even some people who have mortgages who get support from the government, because without that support, they'd be living in poverty. But let that sink in. 80% of renters in New Zealand receive some form of housing subsidy. We've come so far, so low in our housing supply that we cannot house our people without giving them cash handouts to be able to afford a basic necessity, shelter. And when housing is really expensive, and it's a big part of your costs, it can be one of those big contributors to people's financial stress, to poverty. We know that poverty in New Zealand is expanding. It's having all those issues around other places, but housing is one of those core parts that's making it particularly hard. The biggest driver of why people don't have enough money to spend on other things that they want, like fresh food and those other bits and pieces that are good for their families and their well-being, is because they're spending so much of their income on shelter, on transport, getting to and from work, and utilities. The frivolities of life have become cheaper. We can access entertainment at the press of a button, but the basics of life, particularly housing, has become less available and more expensive and lower quality. The crisis in housing has happened because of long-standing issues, and one big driver of that has been an increase in demand. We want more homes, and it's come from two sources. First, just the physical demand for houses. When you've got population growth, when you've got more New Zealanders, you need more homes. And we've needed a lot more people, particularly in the last decade, because of very strong population growth through net migration, but also because we have an aging population. And that means we're living in smaller households, more singles, more couples, so we need more homes and different types of homes to be able to house people. The second source of demand has been investment demand. Because housing has been such a good investment for so many people, we think this is the only way to be able to save for our financial comfort. So there's a huge amount of demand that comes into the housing market that's purely for investment reasons, and that pushes up prices. Over the course of the last few years, we've seen huge amounts of borrowing, which has all been about buying and selling houses from each other rather than building new homes and building new businesses. And this demand forces do drive up that price of homes because our supply of housing is not keeping up. When it comes to the supply of housing, we built a lot of homes in New Zealand in the period after the Second World War. We had a range of housing policies that we put together that was around land supply, infrastructure, transport, social housing, support for people to be able to borrow mortgages, capitalization of the family benefit. There was a range of things. We put all of them together and we built homes and we got people into homeownership. And it worked. If you look at the number of buildings that we consented through that kind of 40, 50-year period after the Second World War, it was truly impressive. But when we had the reforms of the 1980s, we took away a lot of those things, and the level of building dropped, and it remained low until very recently. Out of the last 50 years, we have not built enough homes in New Zealand in 45 of them. This is a long-standing problem. When you haven't built enough homes, it's not surprising that you have too much demand, not enough supply, prices spike up. But we are making progress. Over the course of the last decade, the conversation has shifted from if there is a housing crisis to now it becoming a contest of ideas of how to solve the housing crisis. And this is a really positive place to be. There is a broad agreement that we need to build more homes, that we need to release more land, either for density or in the greenfields, each come with their issues. But also, how do we coordinate when it comes to building more infrastructure, getting those connections for transport, getting those amenities in so people have access to green spaces and other things. So it is really good to see this progress that we're making. But because we have neglected housing supply for so long, for 45 of the last 50 years, we're not going to get on top of it quickly. When we build homes, they're still dedicated towards those who can afford it the best, homeowners. We're still not seeing enough supply of homes for people who are in social housing or in rental housing, even though that's where the housing stresses are the greatest. What we're seeing is this gradual improvement in how many houses we build and moving towards more dense housing than we have seen before. What that means is we're better able to use the infrastructure that's already there, better able to use the land that's already there, and that gives us an ability to go faster than we have in recent years. But we do need to go much faster for much longer, because without it, the accumulated pressures of housing shortages will continue to affect New Zealanders for years to come. When we don't build enough houses, it affects everyone. We talked about rising house prices, we talked about rising rents, but it also affects those people who are at the very bottom of the housing continuum, those people who are homeless, those people who are in social housing. More often than not, these people have very high and complex needs. It's not just that they're poor, they're quite often suffering from multiple other issues like drug dependency, mental health issues, and things like that. So there's always going to be a need in any community for some people to need housing that's not only supported, but also those wraparound things like mental health and health support that will help them. But even here, we have not kept up. Our stock of state housing and social housing has not kept up relative to population. And that means that there is this increasingly acute pressure when it comes to that very vulnerable and very needy part of our housing continuum. There are some examples of how we can do it better. In places like Hawke's Bay and in Rotorua in the last decade, we've seen government, local businesses and philanthropies really coming together to say, how can we work together to be able to build more homes? And what was really striking in all of these places is that when people came together, there was a step shift in the amount of new houses you could build, but also to ensure some of those houses were going to people who need it the most. It's about this and. Not only do we build more homes, we also make sure with some of that is reserved for people who need it the most. Sometimes working together can work really well within the wider context of fixing these big things. The reason why coordination matters, the reason why working together matters, is because at the moment we are spending money blindly. Over the course of the last year, we spent more than $4 billion in housing subsidies across social housing, across accommodation supplement, across things like temporary additional support. These have all become necessities that need to subsidize a form of housing, because without it, people would be in incredible financial stress and housing stress. These are very expensive ways of spending money if you don't put in something else alongside it to also make sure we have more homes in the future. It's not enough to say we're going to spend money. We also have to say, how can we make sure that we're working together with others to fix this underlying problem? I think there are things that we can do that will make it better. When it comes to actions, there are things that we can do inside of organizations like Simplicity. You might have seen that we do quite a lot of work in the housing space because we really believe that there is a way for us to put our capital into better work for this to be a solution. One thing that we're really proud of is Simplicity Living. For those of you who are members, come and have a look at some of the stuff that we're building. Those homes are beautiful, they're at low cost, and they're affordable. By putting a small amount of our money into building homes, we're able to find good returns for our investors, and we're able to make good homes for our people. At Simplicity, we're also putting money into community housing. Community housing providers are good charities that are providing social housing, and they need to borrow money. Borrowing money from banks is expensive. Borrowing money from us can be cheaper. We are getting a better return for our members, and the CHIPs, the community housing providers, are getting access to a better quality of lending. It's a win-win. And finally, we also have Simplicity First Home Loans because we believe that for our members, having access to easy, affordable mortgages is a good thing. So even in our little corner, there are certain actions that we can take ourselves to be able to be part of the solution to the housing crisis that we see. But the really big fixes, the fundamental fixes for our housing crisis are pretty obvious. We need to build more homes, and for that, we need to make sure that we are able to plan for more houses to be built. And that means our land and zoning rules should be much more permissive. We should allow far more density where we have existing infrastructure, existing transport links, and we should be making sure that our infrastructure spending keeps up. Because it's not enough to have land that's zoned. It must be connected up to the infrastructure so people are able to make the most use out of that land. When it comes to building more homes, it's not enough for us to do it only for rich folk. We also need to tip the scales so that we're building more homes for people who have high need. That means we need to build more rentals that are affordable and secure, and we need to make sure there's enough homes for people who need it in social housing. And the way forward is actually relatively simple. We know what the technical fixes are. What we need is coordination. We need to be able to work together across government, across funders, across banks, across business to be able to say, we want to solve this housing crisis. We know what the solutions are. What is a common pathway for us to be able to get there? I've taken you through a big housing story arc. The start of it is the housing market is broken. It's too expensive, there are not enough homes, and they're of poor quality. The problem definition is very clear. The causes of how we got to this housing crisis are also really clear. It's decades of policy neglect. But we're starting to see a change. We have agreed as a country there is a problem to be solved, and we've got many smart minds that are thinking about the solutions. We have a political contest of ideas of how we solve this, and it has to be really grounded on those basic ideas of why we're doing this. We're doing this because we want people to have homes that are affordable, that are dry and comfortable, and they're secure. If we're able to do that for different parts of society, our housing crisis will be resolved. We're not there yet. We need to make sure we stay true to the underlying causes, that this is a problem of our own making, and it can be only solved if we all pull together, knowing the kinds of levers that we need to pull. The final thought for me is housing is a fundamental human right. It's a basic need for all New Zealanders. Right now, we're failing on too many of these commitments. To be able to fix it, we need to build more homes, but my ask of all of us is we need to not only build more homes, but we need to ensure we build homes with a priority for people who need it the most. Those people who are in social housing and those people who are in rental housing, because if we can fix those two things, it'll cost us less and it will make us much better off as a society. Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe. And if you think somebody else will enjoy it, please send it on to them. See you next time. Everything we cover in this session is for general information only. We are not tailoring our comments to your financial situation or providing financial advice or recommendations. This information and comments we provide are not intended to convey any guarantees as to the future performance of any investment products, asset classes, or capital markets. Past performance is no guarantee of future performance. Please refer to our full disclosure statement in the description.